Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a very, very terrifying and entertaining, insightful set of encounters for you. Before we get into that, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. So, I live in a small town inland off the coast of New South Wales. I say in a town, but the house is actually situated a few kilometers out of town. It's the kind of area you can see your neighbors in the distance, but you'd really have to scream bloody murder for them to hear you. A few more kilometers up the road and it turns to solid bush and national park. It's an old dirt road with trees either side, quiet apart from the few dirt bike riders who go up there mostly on weekends, and the occasional lost car, four-wheel drive, or person collecting wood. So for me, it's the perfect place to walk my dogs. On the day in question, I was out with my two dogs, a Great Dane and a Husky, and my mom's dog, a Scotty Terrier. My Husky likes to misbehave, so to stop her taking off into the bush at the smell of a kangaroo, she's on an extender leash. My Dane is loyal to the core, so he's off a leash, and so is the Scotty. She can be a pain and run off, but always comes back. So this bush road has what are called fire roads. I believe therefore if you are caught in the bush and fires, so there are other escape paths, but I'm not 100% sure. These little beat-up paths are 20 times rougher than the already rough dirt road I walk along. I was heading back towards my house at this stage when suddenly all the dogs froze up. For a moment I thought it must have been a roo or a wallaby and instinctually grabbed my Husky's leash tighter. She always pulled my arm off when she saw or smelt a roo, but they were all frozen. I could see the fur on my Dane stand up on end as they stared ahead towards the fire trail that branched off. For a moment, I thought it must have been a person, and they were on edge because they hadn't expected to see anyone. But I was actually taking the time to look at where the three of them were staring at. I finally saw it. A brown-colored shadow in the thinner area of the trees before the dirt track, about 15 meters away. Now, I walked this road nearly daily, so I knew each damn log in this area, and it wasn't something I hadn't seen before. This was confirmed when the damn thing suddenly shot off and moved. It was fast, like abnormally fast, the kind of speed you'd expect from someone on a motorbike, but there was no motor. In fact, despite my straining my ears, I heard no sound. No cracking of sticks, no rustling of branches. It just took off into the thicker trees after standing there and watching me for a good 10 seconds. I was sure I had to be going mad, but as I looked at the dogs, all their heads were turned, staring in the direction this thing had just vanished. It took me another 30 seconds standing listening before I finally managed to move forward toward the spot this thing had been. I had to pass it to get home. As I walked past it, the dogs all acted strangely. My normal brave Husky wouldn't go near the spot, kind of sniffing at it from a distance, then pulling ahead. The Dane did a full circle of the spot, going to the furthest point on the other side of the road. His tail tucked between his legs, and the Scotty followed him, cowering in his shadow. I'd never seen him act like this before. Normally, if there was an animal or a scent, they would all barge each other to sniff it, but they wanted nothing to do with this spot. If it was a person, my Dane would normally go into defense mode and stand guard. so I don't know what it was. Walking in this area so often, I knew the sounds of roos, wallabies, birds, snakes, even feral deer made. But this thing, it moved like it didn't touch the ground, not a sound. Had the dogs not been there and reacted in the same thing, I would have thought I was insane or imagining it, but the silence of the brush after, it made me feel so not right, and the whole walk back home, I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but would see nothing and hear nothing. As I left the bush area, I began to feel more at ease, and my dogs began to relax. Honestly, I don't know what I saw that day. There isn't much of Aussie paranormal except for Yahwehs and spirits, but this figure was too big for a person. It seemed wide and solid, more like a bear on hind legs kind of built. It was way too tall, but clearly there are not bears or animals like that in Australia, so what did I see? What did my dogs see? It freaked them out like I have never seen, and I haven't seen it on my walks again since. Then again, I've made sure to walk with others more. While I felt uncomfortable and nervous, I don't know if I was in danger or what. I mean, it didn't attack me, though I felt like it followed me for a while. Either way, certainly I won't be going out there without my dogs. Today's second encounter. This happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I wanted to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm ranch land that backed up into the state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. Needless to say, it made us pretty tough, and it takes a lot to spook us. We're all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the United States Navy. He was 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. He was home on leave and went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming into the house shaking and crying, saying he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My grandmother immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys hunting, my dad, a few cousins, my uncle, who was still terrified but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken, got all their shotguns and ammunition and saddled up on the horses to go clear the woods. Apparently they were aware of the Dogman, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step off or outside our house or porch until they returned. I had never heard my dad or grandfather be so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes and they're still not back. I'm getting worried at this point because they never stayed in the woods after dark. Shortly I heard the sound of the horses running to the barn and their voices. I was relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably not to spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law that I was no longer allowed to play outside or go into the barn alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my grandfather taught me how to shoot. I knew it was serious. I overheard the adults talking the next night. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had his sighting bigger than any wolf could make, but they were definitely dog tracks. As I said before, we are avid outdoorsmen and hunters and can identify tracks easily, but these could not be identified. About 8 feet up the tree were claw marks. No Michigan bear could make those. We also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout our property, had cattle mutilations, and, not in the way of coyote or bear, would, and it lasted the whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, all of them mutilated, all with the same wolf/dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows, he did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, before he committed suicide. After that experience, though, he was never the same. He went from not having drinking to never seeing without a bottle of Jack, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality and never went out into the woods again. He quit hunting and eventually just quit coming home to visit and leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe he saw something out there, and it ultimately killed him. Today's third part of the upload. I live in a very secluded, woodsy part of a small southern town. It's really peaceful during the day, but it gets a little fucked up at night. There's a few houses on my road, but for the most part, it's only trees. There are a few reoccurring events that are all pretty spooky, but the main one is what my friends and I call the Dogman, for a lack of better name. I've only seen it twice in my life. I've lived in this part of town for 3 years. The Dogman has a body shaped like that of a scrawny human. Its bones are very visible. It has fur, but only patches all over its body, sort of like a dog with mange. Though it has bodily proportions of a person, it has the head of a dog, and can run extremely fast. Also, it's friggin' huge. It's quadruped. To preface, my room is at the front of the house. Our front yard is the size of a field. I have the biggest window in my house in my bedroom, and it faces out to the front yard. I don't have blinds over my windows, and my bed is in front of it. The first time I saw the Dogman, it was late at night. I was sitting in bed. I saw it running through my yard shortly after my cat, who was an indoor-outdoor cat at the time, came inside growling. The cat was found dead across the creek near my yard this July. He had no visible injuries. He was very young and healthy. We still don't know how he died. The second time I saw him was probably earlier this day. My friend and I were sitting on my porch. We noticed a very large moving mass on the base of the mountain, which we live right in front of. We decided to get a closer look. My friend stayed behind to watch as my grandfather and I drove down the road to the base of the mountain. I didn't want to drive there alone. As we got near, we stopped in front of the mass. It was a tree. Something then spreaded out from behind of it, and in the woods right in front of us. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that it was the Dogman. Today's fourth encounter. My great-grandmother owned 28 acres in rural Kentucky. She left 14 acres to my Aunt R and 14 acres to my Gram. My Gram left her land and her house to my husband and I. My experience actually happened before my husband and I ever met. About 8 years ago, I was out in the woods behind our house with my ex-boyfriend and my friend. We were exploring and just hanging out. Sometimes during the escapade, I split from them and went off on my own. I know my land very well as I grew up here, so I headed off for a clearing I thought would be kind of nice to relax in. The clearing in question is pretty close to the edge of the woods, and you can even make out the back of my barn if you look hard enough. When I cleared the trees, I immediately felt like I was being watched. It was so sudden and so intense I actually stopped in my tracks. Some part of my mind was in control, but it didn't feel like me, if that makes sense. The part that was in control told me to turn around so I could face the way I just came from, slowly, and not make a sound. When I turned, I didn't see anything right away. Just the forest I came out of, and what looked like a downed tree off to the left. But my head told me to move slowly out of the woods. In order to do that, I'd have to pass that downed tree, as the pass out of the woods runs that way. For some reason, I really didn't want to do this. My body started moving me, and I made my way down the path toward the tree, keeping my eye on it. But the closer I got to it, the less tree-like it looked. Finally, I was in front of it about 10 feet away. It wasn't a tree. It was an impossibly large wolf-like creature staring right at me. It was lying down with its head on its paws, and it was massive. I wanted to scream and run, but my mind wouldn't let me. It told me to be as quiet and slow as I could. I stared at the thing for what felt like minutes, but was probably only a few seconds. Even still, I got a great look. It was dark brown, as big as a black bear, and really still. Its eyes followed me as I moved, but that was all that moved. I know it was not a bear, because I know the difference between bear and canine. I cleared the woods and immediately ran for my house, screaming for my ex and my friend. Weirdly enough, I didn't tell them what I saw, and didn't even want to. Not because it sounds crazy, but because I just didn't think I should. 5 years later or so, I was hanging out with my cousin, and I had the sudden urge to tell her what happened. She grew up around these woods as well, so she knows where the clearing is. I thought she wouldn't believe me, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood straight up while I was explaining this. And I knew at that point she had seen it as well. She told me that when she was young, she was playing down by the barn with her siblings, my other cousins, and my Aunt R called them for dinner. My other cousins went up to the aunt's house, but my cousin stayed to play. She was throwing rocks at the trees when she saw the same wolf come running out of the woods at her. She said it was fast enough to get from the wood line to the barn, about 200 feet, by the time she got to the orchard, which is 20 feet from the barn. She ran to my aunt's house and never breathed a word of this. The older she got, the more convinced she became that it was a dream. I haven't been back to that clearing since that day, and my cousin's story explains why I never saw her go into the woods when I was young. My sister hates it out there because she claims she feels like she's being watched. Everyone but me thinks she was ridiculous. My cousin theorized that it's some type of guardian spirit. Was angry with her for throwing rocks at the trees, and that's why it was aggressive with her. It didn't attack or chase me because I wasn't harming anything. I'm not sure, but it's the best explanation we have, as no one but us knows about it. I'm sharing this with everyone for the first time in a while, honestly, just so maybe someone could explain it to me. The weirdest thing of all is that my cousin swears she remembers it having large purple-colored eyes that burned into her, but I don't remember what its eyes look like. I stared into those eyes for seconds, and still to this day can't remember what they look like, only that they followed me. This is 100% the truth. I was 100% sober that day. I don't have any history of hallucinations or delusions. In fact, I rated high for logical thinking and rational thought when I was evaluated. Today's final encounter. I saw a dog-faced, yellow-eyed, snarling beast that looked like a trench coat opposite a graveyard. I know it sounds dumb as anything you've ever heard, but I swear it to be true. My girlfriend at the time was working at a bar in a village she lived in. The village is pretty quaint, and she lived at the bottom of a hill that was around a mile or so walk. I went to the bar to meet her after her shift, and we had no more than 2 drinks after, so left at about 12:30 and said our goodbyes to the manager and the other bar girl. As we were walking to her house, following the same routine as always, we would pass a Sounds cliche, but typical graveyard. This village is pretty old, and the graveyard as well. Naturally. Anyway, I make the joke about the graveyard being open, and we simultaneously laugh out nervously when we see, about 30 seconds later, mid-chat, that the gates are in fact wide open. This was strange at the time, so me being 19-year-old dickhead boyfriend started to wind her up and try to scare her for fun. She brushes it off and we continue to walk. Okay, just for the record, my girlfriend at the time was and is fairly skeptical, but I have an odd shit happen since I was a kid. I digress. We continue walking. She looks behind and says, "What the hell is that?" So, standing by the bushes next to the pathway directly adjacent to the graveyard stands what I can only describe as a tall, shaggy man with a dog's face, bright yellow eyes, and the most malevolent expression you had ever seen, staring at me from around 70 meters up the road. I let out shit and grab my girlfriend's wrist and run. She starts crying and literally drops to the pavement shaking. I lift her up and practically carry her up the road. We get to the bottom of the hill, and my memory isn't that clear after. I assume the lack of incident after means that we just went home. I do remember, however, that we kind of just didn't talk about it ever. I still speak to her, and this incident was about 11 years ago. I'm 30 now. It came into my head the other day when I was chatting with her on Facebook and asked if she still remembers. She said she did, and it was freaky. She also said that it was the only time she ever saw me afraid. I was terrified. Bonus encounter. Howdy all, my family is a fairly strange relationship with the Dogman in the southern east region of the United States. I've always lived in Maryland, but my family originally started off in Louisiana. My family were, as my grandfather puts it, carny entrepreneurs. Our family arrived from Cuba and started our little carnival act, which I'm happy to say isn't still in action, around 1898. They would travel throughout the South performing and doing work on defunct plantations and farms. During this time, my you get the point, grandfather came into contact with a local Native American tribe. He never really talked about it, but shortly after my family started having contact with the Dogman, my grandfather, back when they were still traveling with the carnival, talked about seeing the beasts walking around their camps at night. He has a bunch of stories that I may share later on, but he suffers from dementia pretty heavily, so we might have to take him with a grain of salt. My dad worked for a while in the telephone industry putting up poles. He was up doing maintenance one night on Gambrel Mountain. As he was driving back down the mountain, he saw about 3 dogmen running alongside his truck and staring at him through the windows. My experiences are a bit more involved. I've been hunting in the mountains around where I live for quite a while now, and every time I head out and see one of them, typically they're off in the distance or just walking around the riverbanks fetching water. I wanted to know if anybody has any sort of explanation why they seem to be following my family. I've heard they can be pretty violent if provoked, but I haven't seen them hurt anything. Wouldn't put it past them, though. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I was hoping Victor would call me today and talk with me, but I did not get a call. Like I said last night, he is on dialysis, so I'm going to be very respectful and not text or call until he texts or calls me. Something that I want to run by you guys. I've always been intrigued and fascinated with the paranormal. And I've been kicking it around now for a while about starting an urbex/ghost hunting channel where I go and explore abandoned buildings, or locations that have sightings or experiences around there. Anyway, I really want to do this, but I don't want to do it on this channel, so I'm thinking about starting a second channel, and I'm hoping that when I do, you guys will be just as supportive as that with that channel as you are of this one. I will let everyone know when I do start that channel, and it's not going to affect this one at all. I will still continue to do my daily uploads, but that channel I may only do 2 or 3 videos a week, depending on locations and stuff. So, alright, well, I just kind of wanted to run that by you. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I want to bid you farewell and see ya!